Not every toxic relationship is romantic. When we talk about toxic relationships, most people immediately think about dating or marriage. But the truth is that some of the relationships that hurt us the most are not romantic at all. Sometimes emotional dependency exists within the family, in friendships, at work, in relationships where you feel like you have to make yourself smaller just to be accepted. Because toxic relationships are not defined by the type of connection. They are defined by what they do to you. And there is something deeply painful about that. Sometimes the relationship that hurts the most is the very one society tells you that you must keep. The mother who invalidates your feelings. The friend who only shows up when they need something. The boss who destroys your self-esteem every day. The family member who uses guilt as a form of control. And then you begin to believe that love is supposed to feel like this. Walking on eggshells, staying silent no matter what, living in a constant state of emotional exhaustion, feeling guilty for setting boundaries. But it isn't. No healthy relationship requires you to abandon your identity in order to belong. And perhaps one of the quietest consequences of these relationships is this. You begin to disconnect from yourself, from what you feel, from what you think, from what you deserve. Because when someone spends years trying to avoid rejection, conflict, or abandonment, they learn to silence their own voice. And eventually a difficult question appears. How do I begin finding my way back to myself? The answer begins with small practices. Small, but deeply transformative. Practice 1. Start validating what you feel. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Without trying to justify it. People who have experienced emotional manipulation often learn to distrust their own pain. And rebuilding yourself begins when you stop invalidating your feelings simply because someone else minimized them for a long time. Practice 2. Notice where you are afraid to disappoint others. In which relationships do you feel that you need to over-explain yourself? Apologize constantly. Walk carefully. Hide parts of who you are. Because the constant fear of disappointing others is often a sign of emotional exhaustion. Healthy relationships allow presence, not emotional survival. Practice 3. Reconnect with who you were before the pain. What parts of yourself were left behind while trying to preserve certain relationships? Sometimes rebuilding self-esteem begins with small things. Listening again to music you once loved, or turning to an old hobby. Saying no without guilt. Taking up space again without fearing that you are bothering others. Because healing begins when you understand you were not born to spend your life shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's relationships. Not every toxic relationship is romantic. Sometimes the person who damages your self-esteem the most also says they love you. And love without emotional respect should never cost you your identity.
If you want to learn how to recognize emotionally destructive relationships and strengthen your emotional identity, subscribe to Ties That Hurt. Because this series is not only about romantic relationships, it is about any connection that makes you forget who you are. And perhaps someone needs to hear this today. Share this video. Tell me in the comments, in what kind of relationship have you felt the strongest need to make yourself smaller just to be accepted? Suggested reading. If you want to better understand toxic emotional bonds and emotional resilience, The Gifts of Imperfection explores shame, authenticity, and self-worth. Women Who Run with the Wolves explores emotional reconnection, identity, and finding your voice again. Films and series. Some stories portray emotionally exhausting relationships beyond romance. Lady Bird explores complex emotional conflicts between a mother and daughter. Maid portrays emotional abuse within family and intimate relationships. And The Devil Wears Prada illustrates psychological strain and toxic pressure in workplace relationships.